Guys, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.
So we are rolling.
Rolling? Great.
Oh, hello guys, welcome to another episode of Chat with Venki. Today we have actor, singer, songwriter, guitarist extraordinaire, Mr. Arjun Dhanraj.
Extra. Thanks, man.
Extraordinaire.
Yeah, put
He's
that on
known-
my resume now.
yeah, nerve-wracking man leading the teenage men. If you want to put it that way.
How long did you take to come up with that?
Actually, I was thinking about it, like how to connect the two band names, but finally I managed it.
Good job.
So man, like you had one of the most, after stalking you for quite some time, I went through all the things that you have done. I listened to all the stuff. It was, if not anything, it's tremendously entertaining. At least it was so fun.
Can't be
So
that anything else, but it's entertaining. Entertaining. Rahul Gandhi's speeches. Okay, or
But-
Donald Trump. I mean, yeah. Anyway, thanks. Thanks for that.
It's just like, how do you do all that, man? What are you doing currently? What are you doing? I'm more interested in now.
Currently, I'm trying to be safe and stay indoors, and I'm still a virgin since March. So,
Okay, since March.
so yeah, I'm following all the rules and protocols as much as I can. But fortunately for us, there's all, as in, like you said, artists, we get to always be entertained and we get to always keep ourselves doing something. Even back in the day when I was young, for my parents, it was like a thing because I'd be bunking school and bunking all the regular day shift activities to, I don't know, play guitar, go out and do. I mean, invariably, I'd be doing something art related because when you're a child, that's like entertaining and it's all fun, right? So that came back to us these days, as in like when we have nothing else to do. Yeah, there is a lot of Netflix binge watching which is happening, which is currently right now. That's what's happening more than anything else. But early lockdown days, a lot of stuff. So I'm trying to form a Hindi band, which of course I'm not singing. I'm not going to be singing.
I was
But-
so intrigued hearing you sing in Hindi. Okay,
No,
but
I
here's
might
a
be
challenge
back.
for you. Explain your next few statements that you're going to say in Hindi.
ठीक है, वो तो हो सकता है. But, तो क्या सीन है ना, मैं बचपन से हिंदी में बात कर सकता हूँ because मेरा बाप फौज में था, so I've had the Hindi in me, but it's always been a second language. I'm switching back. Okay, it's always been a second language to me. So being Malayali originally, I have a little bit of Malayalam in me. Like it comes out every time I meet like old relatives, grandparents and stuff like that back in the day. My dad's mom is still alive, but I've lost my other grandparents. But we used to like visit. I mean, I was in boarding school, so when we had holidays, I'd go and visit different people at different parts. So I used to love going to my mom's side of the family, they were in Coimbatore. And there, yeah, most of us were English speaking, first language English speaking, but aunts and uncles did speak in Malayalam, and so I understand. Okay, so if somebody speaks to me in Malayalam, I can understand. If there's another Malayalam speaking, first language Malayalam speaking person in the room, I can tell no matter what he says, whether he's speaking in English or in Tamil or in Hindi or whatever, I can tell. Okay, I will catch that one thing and I'll be like, hey, are you Malu? He'll be like, yeah, yes, I am. Okay, so it'll come out. But I don't know Malayalam. Like Malayalam is my fourth language, if anything else, because it's
Okay,
like
what are the other two?
English, Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam maybe. Tamil
Oh.
because I lived in Chennai 8 years, so I've grasped that language.
So,
But
அப்புறம்
again, speaking
இந்த
Tamilian,
podcast நம்ம தமிழ்லயே கண்டினியூ பண்ணலாமா அப்புறமா?
பண்ண முடியும், but people will laugh. Tamil speaking. So I'll tell you a funny Tamil story. Okay, when I went to Chennai recently, meaning like after I hadn't been to Chennai in a really long time, so that whole metro situation, I wasn't aware of when I went back. And I've lived in Chennai. Like I know Chennai in and out. Okay, so like a lot of these places look really different. I'm like, whoa, what's happening? So I was in this Uber, and every time I visit Chennai, because especially when I'm on a Bombay to Chennai flight, I have that look, right? I mean, when I had my long hair and all that, I look like I'm originally from Bombay, maybe. But so at least with these Chennai guys, so they always try to come rip me off and sir, taxi, no. I'll be like, yeah, cool. I'll try to put on that fact, no. But when I get into the Uber, no, I have to let them know that I know this place and whatever, just to like
Don't
feel that.
scam me.
So,
Chennai cabbies are very bad.
usually don't, but it's more of a like I want to feel comfortable kind of situation. So I was trying to do that, and I asked but the thing about the metro was, I'm like, in the metro pudusa irukala, and he's like, ama pudusa ipoda free something and all. He was talking about Coimbatore to, he told me the routes and all that. So some of them were underground and some of them were overhead. Okay, so I wanted to ask him, I'm like, so is the metro underground or is it overhead? So I'm like, Anna, in the metro underground over a poringla. He's like, Anna, puriyala.
Over a poringla, it means something else.
So to non-Tamil speaking people, what I literally asked him was, is the metro underground or is it showing off, or does it think too much of itself, right? And immediately I realized, I was like, either overhead or underground. Yeah, lots of funny shit happens when I try to speak in my regional languages. But that happens in Hindi also, especially when I sing. So I met this guy Pallav, who's a very fabulous Hindi singer. So he sings really well, and he has that Hindustani classical style of singing. And I come from a rock background, so I met this guy Emmanuel, who's he's a music producer, very, very good, up my alley. His production style, he's like totally into rhythm and melody, which is what I'm mainly into, right? So so there was a good blend, and I was like, wow, we should do this. So we have like this glitch rock vibe that we've come up with Pallav's classical style of singing. So we've done 2 covers. We're going to put up one of them soon, and let's see how it goes. So that's one thing I've been up to. Another one is an animation series that I've been working on, which about the band. So it's about Arjun and the Teenage Men. I mean, it's about ATM actually. It's called ATM. But what the show is about is basically, I'm looking at it through ATM's eyes, and it's about how independent artists survive in India, where Bollywood kind of rules the market and everything. So so it's something that I've been working on, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but I'm trying to pitch it now. So let's see. And ideally I would like this to come from like a Netflix Los Angeles or something, because the content is very, it's quite dark. And I think there's a lot of it which Indian audiences might freak out about, but I'm excited. I'm really excited about it. So which is why when I pitch it to Netflix India, I feel like a lot of it will have to be censored out, or a lot of it may not even be, I might not even be able to do it. But I feel like if I do this as a Netflix America show, or even like Canada, whatever, I mean like West Coast, where their censorship laws are a little more liberal than ours, I think we can make it happen. So let's see. I'm trying to pitch it.
Like now you've spiked my interest, man. Like how dark is it that you have to even consider like, okay, West Coast side Canada where it's that low?
No, because I grew up watching this kind of stuff. Like for me, content is the only reason I'm saying this is because of the content, and it's dark in that it's, I mean, it's something that you and I would have always seen. Like, if I'm sure the comedians you watch, are you into like, what's his name? Jim Jeffries and Jimmy Carr and these kind of people. Their humor is very dark. So it's already out there. It's not something that's never been done before. But the advantage of having animation content, which is, like an animation series where you can go the South Park route and the Family Guy route, and you can literally pick at a subject. I can make fun of a celebrity without really making fun of the celebrity, if you know what I mean. Like those kind of things, which is not really the idea. I mean, that's not the aim of the show, but I'm saying that you can do so much with animation that you can't do in live action. I don't want to reveal, I don't want to tell you situations and all,
please don't.
If I want to play with an animal, like I want to get the animal to do something funny, be it a leopard or a chimpanzee or whatever. To get this happening in real live action, I'll have to get a trainer, I'll have to train the animal to do stuff. Here I can make the animal do whatever I want to do. I want the animal to make me a sandwich, I can get the animal to make me a sandwich, So it's, in animation, you can do whatever you want. Like, I'm saying, I don't have any place where I'm getting an animal to make me a sandwich as yet, but I can do that if I have to. So So I'm excited to see where it goes. I have my first season chalked out in my head, and I have the episodes. Uh, I've divided them into episodes. I know what's going to happen and everything. But beyond that, um, it's a gamble. I mean, it could go anywhere depending on where the show goes. Like, I've planned my first season out in my head. I know where it's going. In terms of where it goes beyond that, second season, third season, there's a huge scope. So my initial idea was to I used to work in Furtado's as a brand manager, and they had made me head of marketing for a period before I left, and that was an exciting phase. So I came up with this concept there. I wanted this to be like a marketing tool for Furtado's, where the show was supposed to be called Furtado's Stoned, where it's a band that Furtado's Stoned works in two ways, because it could be Furtado Stoned or it could be Furtado's Stoned. So musically, and and it's a musical distribution company. We as brand managers were all musicians in the company and everything. So it was all based on real life experiences. But the show was about how different musicians in this scene are all working as brand managers to make ends meet and whatever. And the boss has made us form an internal company band, which was called Furtado's Stoned. And that company band was solid cacophony. Like, we're all really good musicians in the story. Everybody's really good at what they do. But because the boss's rule was every brand manager has to be a part of this band for HR reasons, like just to make attendance. Every band manager has to be a part of the band. So we had 5 guitarists and 3 drummers, and this was my first concept. I'm saying when I thought about this as a Furtado's concept. So we had 3 drummers and 5 guitarists and multiple keyboardists and 3 singers and whatever. And I was going to record the music in such a way where if you listen to each person's solo track, it's amazing. There'll be some really great guitar parts going on. But when you play it as a song, there's cacophony. You can't hear shit that's happening. And in that concept, everybody knew it was shit except the boss. Like, the boss really loved it, and he was like, and our vocalist, the second episode introduced this new vocalist. So the vocalist and the boss were the only 2 guys who really thought this was some really amazing music, but everyone else knew it was shit. And that was my initial concept. But when I pitched it to them, they were quite this thing about the drugs aspect, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to promote drugs. I'm never going to be that guy who has a show that says, oh, drugs are cool and you got to do drugs. But we do. I mean, in the music industry, there's a lot of shit that goes on. There'll be joints happening, there'll be ecstasy, there'll be all this shit that's going on, illegal shit happening. But I'm still going to make it illegal in the show, and it's going to be like, it is illegal. Somebody will get busted if they, So it's not that I'm going to promote it, but still, I understand where they're coming from. They're a very, Orthodox Christian family, and they don't want to mix these things. So eventually I decided that I'm going to keep it raw and just make it my own. And so
in the raw terms, it sounds still very interesting. Even if you take out all the drugs and the other part, the fun that a band has, and like you said, if there are 5 drummers, 6 guitarists, like 6 solo guitarists playing solo together, whose solo will sound more?
I had actually recorded some rough layers for our first episode and whatever, because I was trying to pitch it at the time, and I had recorded some audio elements and whatever, and it sounded really cool. I mean, I played all the parts, but I played it as very rhythmic, nice parts. Individually, they're all really cool, but they sounded really bad. So it was fun. Yeah, that was something I was looking forward to. But now I'm pitching it. Now the show has completely changed. It's a very different. It's not Furtado's Stoned anymore. There's no. So and the show is not about drugs. It has nothing. The name Furtado's Stoned was the only thing. But yeah, the music, the band members, everything, it's all Arjun and the Teenage Man stuff. So that way I get to promote my music as well, because it's very, like, the ATM especially is not very technical. It's not like Nerve Wreck. Nerve Wreck there's a lot of technicalities in my Nerve Wreck songs, but ATM is a lot more, it's simple stuff that I've written on acoustic guitars. Nerve Wreck also I kind of did write on acoustic, but it was still very Mustaine acoustic that I was doing, right? So, but ATM is very standard. Like, a lot of it started with like Ed Sheeran vibe songs and whatever, which eventually became, like, initially the plan was to be me on acoustic guitars, Roop on bass, Vignesh on electric, and Mayank on the drums. But what eventually happened was, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm married to the electric guitar, man. There's just so much you can do with it, So, We played a couple of shows like that, and you can't really like in the record you can hear it. When you record the songs, you can hear the acoustic however you want to, and if you have a good engineer, he can bring it out and do whatever you want with it, right? But live when you're playing, it's a very different vibe, and that acoustic guitar just doesn't cut. It doesn't come out the way I wanted it to. So then the songwriting kind of changed, but it's still very simple stuff. It's not very technical. It's nothing that I want to. So in a market like in India, where especially the hardcore underground fans, they know their shit, man. I mean, I know people who have nothing to do with music. They own these Slipknot t-shirts and whatever. They're not musicians, but they know about what 7/8s are and what, how to break down time signatures and stuff like that because of the kind of music they've been listening to. And so I've gone through that phase where you grow up thinking that the kind of music that ATM writes is pussy music, Like I have gone through that phase myself. Like I used to love listening to Michael Jackson, but only on headphones because metal, dude. Like, no, you can't listen to anything this. We all kind of graduate from that.
I'm a diehard Michael fan. When he died, I cried. I literally wept.
I
because my whole guitar journey started because I was in 9th standard, picking up, going to classes, learning from my teacher. One of my friends was once a dancer, and he gave me the 1995 MTV music video performance of MJ.
Wow, yeah, that's a great one.
And in that video, a dude came with a hat, with a long hair, with lots of accessories, and I was trying to have a clear look at his face. I couldn't. In that video, like there's a scene on the ramp he had. There was air blowing from down. Michael's clothes were flying, it was all shirts, and his bones were visible, but Slash's face was not visible. Oh man, from there to Guns N' Roses to Metallica, that's how you entered.
He keeps playing, and then they try to make it look like he's not leaving and whatever, right? That's it. Yeah. But he's always been. So when he died, dude, it felt like literally felt like I'd lost a family member because I woke up to some 120 text messages, and I was shocked. I was like I didn't know. I didn't know about this from the internet. I woke up to like 120 messages from different people saying, dude, I'm so sorry, you must have heard, oh, MJ is no more. And I'm like, what? And I was in shock. I was in utter shock when that happened. So, and the best part is it's not like I learned it from the internet. Like, you know how it is, right? If you were MJ's son and the rest of the world is messaging you, that's what happened to me. I felt like I was related to him, and somebody's like, the people are sending me condolence messages, and I was like, wow. And I really, really cried. It was overwhelming. And when I saw the video, they had a video of the fans coming in. They showed a bunch of stuff. I think there was I don't remember it offhand, but there was a bunch of stuff that they'd shown, and I was watching TV the entire day that day, and I really cried at that out. But I'm over it, dude. COVID-19, that's the new trend. Death is not, it's nothing anymore. Now they're like, oh, someone died. Okay, cool. We'll see them on the other side. Like now it's just a common. I was on a Zoom call with a bunch of my like college friends, and somebody was telling me that one of their friends or someone they know lost their dad, and she was like, oh, so I lost my dad, but thank God it wasn't COVID. Who says that, dude? Like this has become so crazy now. Like I lost my dad, but thank God it wasn't COVID. I'm like, wow. I mean, does it matter? Like seriously, it's been quite a year. You introduced. If this year was nothing else, it was entertaining.
I didn't mean it in a wrong way. Matlab, even if a person, an audience who's listening to a song, if it's not a rock fan, or if it's listening to your content, if not anything, he will watch the entire thing. The person will watch it. It's entertaining.
Thanks, man. That means a lot.
No, because the national song that you put on YouTube, I from there I started, and then I saw your Metanand, Baba Metanand Rahija. From there, you put 3 songs, acoustic set with 3 different people. I feel
with Vidyut and
I,
we have a thing called Harmony. So see, the thing is, I've been trying to do. I like the whole YouTube concept, but I can't have a YouTube channel because I do too many things. Okay, and I can't I would have most of what I do has to be a separate channel. Like if Metanand is happening, Metanand has to be one channel. If it's the kind of songs that I'm doing with Harmony, which is comedy music, that's a separate channel. My ATM songs, which is again, that's just music from the heart. It's not comedy music or whatever. That Nerve Wreck, it's very different. So um, I thought initially that, okay, I can start a YouTube channel and try and put everything up there. But again, it's a lot of work. It's a lot. I like starting out a YouTube channel means you need regular content. So eventually I did realize that even in the digital world, you need to focus on one thing to start off with and make it happen. So yeah, I feel like I'm a performer. I love like this whole period during the lockdown. I had a couple of people that called me for live gigs, as in can you do whatever live Zoom gigs and live this gigs. I didn't want to, like, I tried it with one person. We just had an experimental this thing. Because I was telling him that no, it doesn't feel the same, and he's like, no, why don't we do a trial run? So I did, and it doesn't feel the same. It's not live. I can do videos, like what we're doing right now. This is fun because it's live. It's live, literally what a live conversation is. So it's you and me having a live conversation. But if I was supposed to talk to imaginary people right now, then it's a different set. And then I'm acting. Okay, so that's a completely different scenario. But if I have to perform live to a crowd, I don't know. Like for me, performing to a crowd is a different energy, and I like being in front of the crowd. I don't like reading a comment that's coming like, "Oh, nice solo. Oh, thanks." Like it's really distracting. Then I'm not here, right? So it's weird. So I can't do that. I haven't done even one live show during the lockdown on any of this because it just doesn't. Yeah.
I agree to you because
Okay.
I'm not much into I want to get into, but just a scenario like when I'm working, I'm talking to like 20 people in a conference call. Most of them keep their camera shut. As an audience, of course, they have their well. And when I am performing, I don't want to look at a screen which says a S or a V or a K, and I'm singing a song for them, and I have no idea.
Or even myself perform or whatever. Even in Zoom, for example, I have the option of changing my screen, right? So I can turn it off and then I can see other people. It's not the same. I can't concentrate. Very, very different one. Like I can do what doing where you're playing background music and you're just singing, which he's very good at doing that because Tudlu is he has a different, like for him, his showmanship is, he takes it very seriously, from his attire to what he's going to say on stage to everything. And I've had bad experiences doing it that way because when I used to, like back in the day when I used to prepare what I'm going to say on stage and stuff like that, I used to try to ape the people that I liked. So like I'd try to be James Hetfield or Dave Mustaine or Kurt Cobain or something. And in Chennai, Sarang, I'm standing on a stage in Chennai speaking to freaking Chennai people in an American accent. Okay, I'm not from America. They're not from America. Nobody from America is even going to see what's happening here. I don't know why. The guys I was imitating had an accent. So, yo, how's it going, guys? Are you guys having fun? Yeah, this next song's by Iron Maiden. Like, balls, okay? And the problem is, we used to record those songs on audio cassettes back then, right? So I had the entire show recorded and I'd want to show it to my friends and whatever. But obviously, when I listen to it, I'm so embarrassed with this in-between song bits that happen, which I have prepared for. I have come there saying, this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this line followed by that line in my accent. But it's so embarrassing because even if the songs were good, and because it was on audio cassette, I have to fast forward it. It's not like you can click it off. Like right now in today's age, you can just swipe or click to the next song, right? Now I have to stop, play, fast forward. Is it correct? Oh no, stop, fast forward. So that's damn irritating, right? So basically I couldn't show most of the people that I wanted to impress with my, hey, check out my show, because of all the bullshit that I talked in between, okay? And I was like, not gonna happen. So what I did was, at that time I was in this band called Ignition with this guy Chino, and we used to share the vocals. He used to have this powerful voice and we'd sing those songs and I'd sing the Iron Maiden high-pitched ones and whatever. So we used to share vocals, and when he's singing, he'd talk to the crowd. When I was singing, I'd talk to the crowd. And when he did it, it was so, like when I come to the same part of the show where his song is coming up, it's so natural and you want to hear what he's saying because he's just being himself. And he's like, there'll be Macha and all that. Hey, Macha, this next song, we wrote like, and he's not prepared it. He's come there we've rehearsed for the song. Whatever he's saying is natural and it's coming out so flawlessly and so charismatically. And I was like, wow. So that's when I realized, I'm like, oh, this is actually, I'd rather just be myself. For a while, I was actually being Chino. Then I was like, no, actually, I should be myself. Don't be. So I started doing that and I learned that. But when I watched True Blue perform, now that's the thing I'm saying. he's still being himself. That's the difference. So when James Hetfield says what he says on stage, he was being himself. Me as a fan was trying to copy what he's saying. So same thing with Stu Blue. He's taken the essence of what these guys do, but he's still being himself. He's not being Axl Rose on stage, or he's not trying to be Steven Tyler on stage. You know, these are his fans. You know, these are where his influences come from. But he's not trying to be those guys. So he's still being himself. And if you go for a Stu Blue concert and you hear the stuff he says in between songs, dude, they're powerful words. He's an avid reader. He writes well. So he really knows how to. Even if you read his random posts on Facebook and shit, I'm not a fan of reading. So if I see long statuses, I usually don't. I read that first paragraph and then I'm like, eh. But I've always read Stu Blue statuses. They'll be long ass ones, and I'll go to the end because they're gripping, you know. And that, as a frontman, when you can do that on stage, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter who you're with. It doesn't matter if you're in your own room. You're communicating with people because he's already prepared for what he's going to say. For me now, I can't do that. Now, if I'm trying to do that, I have to be funny. I have to, it'll have to be I'll have to write it in a way where there's comedy involved, or there's something else involved, because I have to make sure that whatever I'm saying is entertaining to myself before I can make it entertaining to anybody else, right? So I feel like the best thing to do is be natural. If you have, for example, if you have a big setup, then you have things that you can prepare. Like I can have pyrotechnics, I can have things like that. So then, yes, I need the lights guy to know which section of the song the pyro is going to come from where. So the band members need to know where to be at that time. So these things you can prepare for. But I honestly don't like what we used to do as amateur musicians coming up on stage for the first time, where we're like, okay, when this breakdown happens, you guys have to stand here and we all do this together. And, you know, like these kind of, that should come naturally, because otherwise, if you're doing this because you have to, trust me, it looks very, very obvious. You can tell that the person is like, oh, headbang. Somebody's told him, "Mummy ne bola headbang kar." Sorry. So,
No, please. It's all okay.
So that's why I feel like the most natural thing is to be yourself on stage, and that's a valuable lesson I learned in my early days, and that stuck with me. So now when I perform, I'm myself. But for me, the drawback in that is, for me, when I perform, I need a live audience. I can't do a digital live. Live audience. I can do digital content, I can make videos, we can do stuff like that, but I can't have a live gig.
Very always
my audience.
This extroverted, what do you call, a guy who can will connect to the audience, will speak to them. Were you always this, or you had issues and you fixed it through some process? Or
yeah, I mean, I guess I always had something, because I've been on stage since I was very young. I was in boarding school, so even then, I mean, even though it was people we knew more or less, but you're still very nervous when you have to go up on stage. So I still get nervous. That I feel like that adds to the performance, because those butterflies just give you a different vibe. But I've always felt comfortable on stage. The problem is when I rewatch what I'm doing. So if I'm recording a concert, either it's an audio recording or if it's a video recording or whatever, while I'm performing, I have never felt uncomfortable. The uncomfortable parts used to come when I'm watching myself and I'm like, oh my God, did I actually do that? Sick. So those were the learning experiences that I threw off, and I was like, oh, don't do this, don't. I knew very well what I was doing when I was on stage. I'm trying to copy someone else, or I'm trying to be somebody else. And so when I watched it back, then I'm like, oh, sick. This is like, it's really pukey. Okay, I'm like, really, I don't want to do this ever again. So, but that's when I started being realistic. But I've always felt comfortable on stage in front of an
how did
audience.
theatre come into all this musical history of yours?
Theatre was something I did a lot of when I was in school. We had this guy I was in a school called Rishi Valley, which is it's a boarding school, and we had this guy called Jerry who used to come and visit us. He's a British gentleman. I think he was in his 50s, 60s when I knew him. I was in the 4th at the time. And he used to come, he'd play football with the footballers. I never played football, but he'd come and play football with the kids. He used to come and read stories to us. And Jerry's Play was an event. Jerry's Play was a big event in Rishi Valley, you know. So like every batch they'd know, and they'd be like, oh, Jerry's coming. So this year we're doing Jerry's Play. This year I'm part of Jerry's Play. That year I'm not a part of Jerry's Play. So whether I was a part of it or I wasn't a part of it, Jerry's Play was a thing. And we used to do a lot of acting in school. We had Hindi drama that I did once with a Hindi teacher. I remember he used to keep telling me, "Oh, don't overact," because like there was a scene where I had to get shot, and I would I need to fall, but I'd jump and I'd throw myself around. He'd be like, "No, no overacting," So, but yeah. So I guess theater was always a part of it. Even in school, I used to do theater and music together. Music is what really stuck with me, though. Theater wasn't something that I never looked at myself being a theater actor or something like that. It happened much later. So music is what stuck with me, and it became something that I took seriously. I was like, oh, this is the one thing that I get bored of things really easily, right? So since this is the one thing that really stuck with me, I was like, I can't see myself doing anything else as a career. So I stuck to that. But eventually then I was in Furtados. I mean, being an English musician in a country like India, you need to have some sort of a backup plan, right? Because I was very adamant about the kind of music that I wanted to do. I'm like, no, Bollywood for me. I'm not going to sell my soul out. I'm not going to be a sellout and whatever. But being a sellout can be smart if you do it well. Okay, so again, lessons, you learn these lessons, but for me, all my learnings, dude, this is something I have learned in my life, and it's the most philosophical thing I'm going to say today, but it's something that everybody should do. Learn something by experience. You will learn it. I mean, now you've learned it, because I can tell you something based on my experiences, based on something I've read. You can read it off a book. You can watch it on current knowledge, which is YouTube videos or whatever the hell you want. You have the most wise family background. They've given you some brilliant generational wisdom. Great. But you will never learn any of that as much as you will when you learn something out of experience. Okay. And that is how I've always learned. Like I will only take something at face value when I learn it at experience. I mean, as an experience. Anything you tell me is something that this guy said, or something that somebody else said, some wise man or somebody else said, but it's a true learning experience is something that I actually learned. So I have learned very young that doing something from the heart you're always going to perform better at it.
Perfect.
I've been asked to do so many things by different people, by my teachers, by my parents, by other people and whatever, friends. Like even if you're doing something out of peer pressure, like some friends tell you something else, this is the way to be. And if you look up to these people, then that is the way to be. You're like, oh wow, yeah. So I did try to dabble
part of that elite list who managed you to do something.
No, this is not what I mean. I'm saying like I can't
don't take my thunder, man. I am being proud here. I managed to make you do something, and you're like, no, don't.
If you tell me, for example, like, hey dude, this chat we had was really fun, why don't we do this now? And this is a new concept, so you and I have to do this for the next year and make money off this with interviewing people or whatever. I might be good at it the first 2 episodes. After that, it's not going to be something I can continue doing for a while. So I get bored of it. So, but music is something that really stuck. And I was like, okay, I got to keep doing this. So like then when Michael Jackson passed away, I started doing tributes. And I think every year since 2009, I've been doing, it started off with tribute tours. I used to tour the country. We used to do Bangalore, Delhi, Hyderabad, Bombay, whatever. Chennai happened and all that. But so eventually one of those years, I think 2012 or 13 or something, we did one in Blue Frog, and Dolly Thakur came for that show. So she told me, Mihir Joshi or someone was performing he was doing a guest song. So while he was performing, I came off stage and Dolly Thakur came to me, and I honestly didn't know who she was, because like I said, I'm not very much into the Indian Bollywood scene or whatever. I mean, I'm not aware of these. I know Aishwarya Rai, I know Shah Rukh Khan and whatever, and I know some of the new guys because they're good. Like Ranveer Singh, Ranveer Kapoor. These are actually good actors, okay? But I'm like, I don't know the current situation and who's who of the industry. So this lady with a big bindi came to me and she's like, is this your number? There was a Blue Frog tissue, one of those Blue Frog tissue papers with my number written on it. She's like, is this your number? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you are very good. And she gave me a kiss and whatever. She's like, this is my card. I'm Dolly Thakur. Please call me tomorrow or whatever. I was like, okay. And another friend of mine, Vibha, who was sitting there at the time, she was also guessing. She's a big singer now, Vibha Saraf. She's quite big these days. She's doing a lot of playback singing and whatever. But she, a beautiful voice. So she was also featured. She was also guesting on one of the songs with me. So she was sitting on that table at that time, and she looks at me and she's like, "Whoa, dude!" And I was like, "What? Are you teasing me with an old lady?" And I'm like, "Dude," she's like, "Dude, that's Dolly Thakur." And I'm like, "Oh, she's big or what?" I was like, kept the car. Okay, now I might as well. And so I gave her a call the next day, and she told me about Alec Padamsee doing the late Alec Padamsee. Great man. That guy is a genius. Again, my ignorance, I didn't know who Alec Padamsee was. Alec Padamsee is huge. Okay, he's like, everybody knows him now. And she told me Alec Padamsee is doing this Jesus Christ Superstar. He did it in 1973 or 74, whatever. And he's bringing it back with a new cast and whatever. She's like, I think you should audition for it because they need, whatever, singers and performers and whatnot. So I auditioned for it, and Alec abused me. And best part is, she said, don't call him. Send him a text message. This is his number. Send him a text message. He'll call you. So I was like, okay. But the text message that I wrote, thank God, dude. So I checked. I Googled him before. I typed the entire message out, and I started with, "Hi, Mr. Alex." Okay. Because obviously I've never heard of a name Alec before. Okay. I've only heard of Alex. And I thought, poor lady, she can't say Alex. She's saying Alec Padamsee, Alec Padamsee. I'm like,
oh, poor Dolly.
Alex. Poor
Can't
Dolly.
pronounce.
So, hi, blah, blah, blah. Dolly Thakur told me, I mean, whatever. I typed out this whole message. And something in me just said, before you send it, just Google the man, dude. So I Googled him, and it said, did you mean Alec Padamsee? And I was like, whoa, yeah, I think that's what I meant. And I was like, whoa. And after I got to know the man, thank God I did, because dude, that guy would have chucked his phone at his assistant because of this. Trust me, he's that cool, okay? Like, he can do, he's literally like God. Like, he can do anything, and that assistant will be like, yeah, because of that guy, Alec chucked his phone at me. So it's still my fault, but Alec would have chucked the phone at him, okay? Like, who's this fucker calling me Alec? Alex, and he would have chucked it. So, so I met him, and he yelled at me and all. He was like, because he's like, apparently they've been auditioning for a really long time. He's like, why are you coming to me now? We've been auditioning since July. And I was like, whoa, okay, I'm sorry. And I didn't want to be adamant and say I didn't know. So I was just like, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I work at Furtado. Some stupid excuse I made. But I got the part, and I was quite happy with the part I got, because Jesus Christ Superstar, if you've seen the play, is a Judas story. So Judas is the star of the play. And from whatever I have seen, all the YouTube versions of the show that I've seen, Jesus has usually come across to me as like a whiny character. Okay, so he would have been my third choice if you had given me a choice, saying, hey, I want you to be somebody in Jesus Christ Superstar. Judas would have been my first choice. The guy I played, Annis, would have been my second choice, because his songs are mad, and he's the one of the high priests who's literally the conniving guy. He comes up with the plan, and he makes Judas kind of betray Jesus and everything. And his songs were really cool. I really liked his songs, because Judas has like very rocky songs. Annis has very rocky songs. Jesus' songs are more those ballady, why have you sent me to... And all. I mean, I don't remember the melodies now, but... So I was actually quite happy that I auditioned late and I got Annis, because I had a very Jesus look at the time.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if I considered to play Jesus at the time, but if I have a choice, Judas, man. Judas is the guy for that play, which Two Blue played. So Two Blue and I had a great time performing, and in our rehearsals and whatnot. So that's where theatre really took off for me. From there onward, I was like, okay, this is good. I want to continue doing this. And again, I prefer acting on a stage than acting in a movie. I did this movie called My Friend Pinto, which was a Sanjay Leela Bhansali production. I played a character called, and yeah, so it was fun. I did some camera stuff, which is fun. I enjoy the fact that if you fuck up, you can be like, hey, no, retake, and do it again. But it's not the same energy. I mean, again, it's like when I'm performing a song, I want to be live. If I'm recording a music video, yeah, that's great. I don't want to do that live. I don't want to record a music video with live audiences and stuff like that, unless there's a part where we need the live audience. But I'm saying, I don't want to have people coming and watching us while we're shooting, because again, this is not live. I don't want that distraction. While we're shooting, we're shooting. So the vibe in a film is similar to that. It's not like live, right? So you don't want distractions. You're shooting, and you're doing your scene. If it comes out great, move on. If it doesn't, do a retake, how many ever times you need. But when it's live, it's a different vibe. So same thing with, just as much as I don't like doing Zoom live shows, similarly, when I perform in theatre, vibe, like acting on stage is another story. And now Taj Express is both, because I'm not actually doing much acting in that show because I'm playing a guitar player who's an asshole. I am that guy. Okay, so it's just that my name is. But so I'm not.
Your
really
voice
doing
went a bit. What is your name
because
there?
Flash. My character's name is Flash. So yeah, in that I have to remember my lines and stuff like that. But again, it comes to me naturally. The character I'm playing there comes to me naturally. But I'm playing a guitar, and the music that we're doing is live. So we have a flautist, we have a percussionist, and there's me, the guitar player. So we have a lot of music that we're playing live. We have some stuff that there's a backing track playing along with us. But all the music that we are playing is live music. All the acting that we're doing is live acting, and so it's kind of like a blend of both worlds for me, and I love it. Like, I really love doing this with Taj Express, and of course the bonus is that we get to do this around the world. So I've done Bangkok, Dubai, and US, Canada with these guys. So it's been amazing.
I have a question for you, which kind of might contradict with what you said. Recently, I saw an interview of this terrific actor from Tamil Nadu called Vijay Sethupathi. He did this movie for Netflix called Super Deluxe. Now, I'm not Super Deluxe.
Okay.
So in that, the guy is playing a transgender character. And apparently when he came to know about the story and such a role, he contacted the director and he didn't charge a single penny because he wanted to do that role to improve his art. Like to do such a challenging role. And like without spoiling to the people, the idea was that this guy was in India. Of course, he was living as a man, but he felt very feminine inside, and at some point he took the decision to go and live like a female. Okay, and apparently he told in that interview that it took him 56 takes before that first correct take, and once he did it, then it went to get into that role properly. And considering that, how do you think about now if you get a challenging role, say behind a camera, and you want to do that, would you do it that way, considering such a role comes?
I love acting. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't like acting in front of the camera. It's great. I'm saying it's a different feeling. So it's completely different when I act in front of a camera versus when I'm acting in front of a live audience. That to me feels more like a live gig, and I enjoy both. I enjoy performing live. I enjoy doing music videos. I enjoy studio recording as well. I like both ends of the world. I mean, both the worlds that we have in this industry. But I'm saying I wouldn't do a live show like this. Like this for me, that's what I meant by saying that. That's a different vibe. But yeah, and see, to answer your question now, for example, if I'm playing a transgender character, for me there's so many ways I can go. Now, as an actor, when I act, I kind of try to take things from real life, either real life people that I know or something that I've seen which stuck with me. It could be like a character that Marlon Brando played, or like somebody played, but it could be something that I'm taking. I mean, I'm obviously not, I can't take that character and be that character, but I'm saying I will take some elements from certain real life people and whatever. So I like doing that when I'm acting. But again, if I'm playing a transgender person, there's so many ways to do this. I can go about it even with the people I know, and if I'm taking real life experiences or real life characters, there's 101 different approaches I can go through. So like you said, I might try 50-60 variants, and the one that works, they'll be like, yeah, this works, then go for it. This happened on camera. Now, if we're doing this live, we will still have this 50-60. We have rehearsals. So before I pick which version of the character I'm going to play, I will still try different versions, and my director will then say, no, why don't you try it? Or the director may have an idea and be like, why don't you play it like this? Or, so we will still have those 50-60 takes that you're talking about. But when you get the character, then you're on. This exciting part is that once you're set and your lines are written and everything is done and go, then you're on go. I mean, like, you can't fuck up. That's the difference. There is no cut, retake. That is the exciting part. Okay, so like, for example, in Jesus Christ Superstar, when we had a half, like this thing. My scene was the first scene after the interval, right? So we're standing there with the curtains closed, and there are a number of shows where I was like, shit, I should have peed, because I have a long scene after that. It's at least a minute scene, when the curtain opens, and I'm like, oh shit, I should have peed. And you know, and we all have the mic here, so I can't say anything. Okay, so I'm just like, and as the curtain opens, I'm just like, oh, back into the character, and you forget it. That moment the curtain opens and it goes, you're done. You forget about it. Before the curtain opens, there's a lot of that. Sorry.
Here's another question for you. Now you talk about a lot of you like to be that you have practiced it perfectly, you deliver it perfectly in front of an audience. Have you ever improvised while performing as a musician or an actor?
Always. That's why I love performing live. That's the beauty of it. Because you dude, and the thing about theater is actually even live performances, there's always audience interaction. If you're doing it well and you're connecting well. See, like if you're not interacting with the audiences, I've had those shows as well where the audience is in their own world. Like you are just doing it for the paycheck now. Okay, you come, you play, and you fuck off. Okay, that's it. There's no real interaction. They are not enjoying what you're doing. You're not interacting with them. It's just like a bland thing. But if there is that energy and there is some sort of interaction, the audience will interact, man. And especially with me, because I'm outspoken. I say shit that comes into my head, and I'm not talking about world peace. I'm not talking about this while I'm performing. I'm not doing a preachy show. I'm talking about what comes into my head. And I'll be like, oh shit, this looks good, or whatever, depending on what comes in. So that engages, like the audience reacts to that. And sometimes they will say things back. And I cannot shut my mouth. I cannot have, even in part, I can't shut my mouth. If somebody says something, you have to respond, right? So that is something like I love doing. And when you get hecklers during a play, I'm playing another character. Now, fortunately for me, I was playing a character that is literally, I'm that character. Okay, like I live like Flash lives in, like at least one version of Flash could be me. Okay, so when we were doing the Taj show in one of the states, this lady was drunk and she kept bantering, like throughout, not just with me, with the other guys. She kept talking, and with me, it was very horny. She wanted to take me home, and she's like, oh, Flash, I want to take you home. And I was like, hey, let's get to know each other first. And, like those kind of banters were going on. So eventually, during the half time when we had our interval, the stage director at the time, Aruna, she came and she told me, she's like, listen, that lady's lost it. Don't encourage. I'm like, okay, I won't encourage, but I can't shut up. So if she says something, I will. She's like, okay, but don't encourage her to, like, And the thing is, okay, here's the most shallow bit. There are lights on the audiences at some points of the play. So I did kind of make eye contact with one really pretty woman who I thought is where that sound was coming.
Okay.
So in my head, girl I'm talking to. So it was very sweet. Okay. Then you have a meet and greet after the show. And in the meet and greet, I noticed the pretty one that I saw. And I knew that it wasn't her because there was another one that came loudly behind her, and I was like, yeah, I recognize that voice. It's not the same girl. Okay. And she came, where's Flash? She came to the meet and greet, and I was like, come, he's not here. Okay, so
I'm not Flash. I'm
not Flash. Uncle. So she went and stood next to him, and she's like, she looks at him, where's Flash? And he's like, yeah, he's not here. And then she's like, can I kiss you? He's like, yeah, on the cheek. And he turns around, and it was quite an embarrassing moment. But yeah, I'm saying these are the interesting things that you will never have this in a movie set. You'll have maybe in the red carpet, you'll have, like, obviously you have your fans that will scream at you wherever you are. But I'm just saying these kind of experiences you will never have in a movie set, So it's improvising. So yeah, to answer your question, I always improvise. During the Taj Express performances, sometimes we are encouraged to not improvise too much. So yeah, when I have the freedom to, I do. Like, I don't obviously want to improvise to piss anybody off, but when you're in a live setup,
down a heckler, like a bad heckler who is messing your performance, and you have to take the person down. I'm assuming not in a theater one, but at least in a music performance one where.
A number of times, yeah. I mean, I do remember moments, but I can't remember what exactly happened because, again, it's a very momentary thing. It's not like I plan these things. But yeah, I pride myself with my one-liners because I've grown up making fun of people getting picked on, and so when you have this, it becomes a thing, right? So for a long time, I was the kind of guy who used to feel bad when and because I'm small, I used to be made fun of all the time. I had long hair. My in Chennai, people know me as Chick, not Arjun. Okay, my name is Chick, and I don't remember, a friend of mine came up with this, and he used to call me Chick. So I gave it a fancy spelling, so CHIQ. So, but it used to bother me at times, especially in Rishi Valley, because uh, I, never mind the details of the story, but my class, from the 4th to the 8th standard, all the guys had this thing that they were unco and girls are untouchable. So like guys would sit here, girls would sit there. And I learned at a very young age that I don't think girls are untouchable. Okay? Like, I learned that. So I had a lot of friends, like girlfriends and whatever in my class. And so we had this game called Green Touch. The rules for Green Touch are, if something dirty happens to you, your Green Touch, you can come and run and touch me. Then I also become Green Touch. So basically people run away from you. But if you come to touch me, and since you're wearing a green shirt, like if I touch something green, then you can't touch me. You have to go and touch someone else.
Okay.
I was perpetually Green Touch because I gave some girl a hug, or I held somebody's hand here, or I touched somebody else's pen. And this is like ridiculous untouchability. Okay, like if some girl touches this pen becomes untouchable now, as far as my class boys are concerned. Okay, pen is untouchable. And I was called, like, people used to call me by my surname, so Dhanraj. Oh, Dhanraj is Green Touch because he picked up somebody's pen. I don't want to name people here because, I mean, obviously now they've all realized that none of them were untouchable. But I'm saying, like, back then, that was the thing. Until, of course, puberty hit, and then suddenly everybody wanted me to introduce them to their own freaking classmates.
Now you are the cool guy, huh?
No, I wasn't ever the cool guy still, because I think that happened like high school onwards, because that's the time when all the studious kids and all are the cool guys. Okay, so like this guy can answer, like when the teacher asks you questions, Richie or this one or that one will be the guys who are going to answer the question. So they were always the cool guys. Arjun doesn't know the answer because he fucking has no idea what subject we're sitting at. Okay, right now. So no, I wasn't really the cool guy, but people would come and ask me stupid favors, like, please introduce me to my classmate. Like, we've been classmates for 4 years, but I want you to introduce me to her. I'm like, dude, you know each other. And then it was quite weird anyway.
Yeah, I'm just imagining you introducing to people. The girl sits on this row, the guy sits on this row. Hey, I know you have seen this guy for the last 4 years. You know his name, you know his roll number, you know what his entire history is. But hello.
That's the beauty. I think now the way I would introduce somebody like that, man, you could take a video. You would want to take a video of that. Back then, no, it wasn't so exciting. Because I was so insecure, dude. I'm feeling happy now that this guy who's never spoken to me because I've always been Green Touch, suddenly he wants me to be his friend. And I'm like, oh, I have a guy friend in my class now, yeah, and whatever. So I used to feel really insecure. I used to feel upset when people make fun of me and whatever. And eventually, I think when I was about 18 is when, actually before that, like high school, 11th is when I changed schools, and I brought my Rishi Valley learnings into general public schools in Chennai, where teachers are hitting students and shit. Man, I came from this terrible school. Like, it's called Hindu Senior Secondary School. They had a badge of it, like a thing here with some maroon white shirt, khaki pants, maroon shoulder pad, which says HSSS in yellow. Hindu Senior Secondary School. Okay, I'm like, wow. So I looked like some third-rate beat cop or some shit like that. And yeah, my English teacher used to say stuff like "lend," and so I'm like, whoa. So I was in trouble most of the time because I'm back. I corrected her. She sent me to the principal's office. Principal yelled at me. I'm like, what? Why am I not allowed to correct my English teacher?
Hey, you're that guy. I am that guy.
Yeah, I attended 45 days of that damn school. I haven't written a single exam in Hindu school. That was my 11th standard, but I got about 86.7% because my school standard exams are internal exams, and my school couldn't handle me. So they were like, we best give this guy high flying colors and tell him to fuck off. So they gave me free marks. They said, please just don't come back, go. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, that was my
It worked. So let me tell you my story. So there was this, my school was like jungle. So we didn't have a boundary wall. We had like a row type school, and they planted trees. That was the school boundary. We play inside that way. So there was this English teacher, and there was this girl who was the smart one. will answer, yes, I am my all assignments are complete on time. I will take the book to the teacher's cabin and that way. And
She's probably a
yeah.
just saying.
So this teacher, she asked me a question. I was on second bench and she asked me a question and I didn't know. So she was sitting just next the other row, and she asked, of course, let's get the answer from the studious one. And she asked her, and she gave the answer. And this teacher, after that, she should have shut up there. She looked at me and she said, something is better than nothing. And I was like, nothing is better than nonsense. And then she kicked me out for the entire semester.
Wow, dude, yeah. Those were fun days. I mean, like, I loved Rishi Valley encouraged this. Like, the teacher-student relationship in that school was very different. At least when I was there, it was very different. And they encourage students to ask teachers questions. Just because I'm your teacher doesn't mean I'm right. If you ask me a question, I mean, this is a lot of what we were learning in school at the time has been disproved now. Like, some of the knowledge that I've been taught is complete crap today. So they encouraged it. And in this case, in the other school, Hindu school, my English teacher made an English fuck up. She said cleaned. And I'm like, ma'am, the past tense of clean is cleaned, not cleaned. How you don't back answer me? I'm not back answering you. I'm correcting you. No, go and meet the principal. All right,
Wow.
man. Principal.
Wow.
Right. Again, I was back answering. I don't remember the conversation, but this part I remember. I was back answering the principal, and he said, "Shall I sign your TC?" And I'm like, "Where do I have to sign?" He got damn pissed. Called my
Yes!
local guard.
That should be a real life thug life moment. Ta-ra-ra-ra-ra, and then join.
Yeah, man. I mean, it was crazy. I feel like my life in Rishi Valley, if I hadn't studied in that school, I would have had a very, very different life. I'm very sure about that because I have seen what shit, and I'm actually promoting my school in this. But yeah, loves it. It's a great school. Any of you have kids, put them in Rishi Valley.
Let's promote this properly. Rishi Valley where?
Rishi Valley School, Madanapalli. I don't know if that's Telangana or Andhra Pradesh right now because again, my geography is terrible. But
Rishi Valley School, hats off to you. You raised one hell of a student. Here's a question for you, so based on all this. Now, you have gone through all these experiences, all this learning, your musical influences have been changed. If I ask you to compose an album, but a one-person band, you'll have an acoustic guitar, you'll be singing, that's all. And you have to give me a 5-6 song cassette. What would these songs be about?
It has to be acoustic.
It has to be acoustic. Only you. There is no one else influencing the song.
Like I can't compose 2-3 layers of acoustic guitar.
Nothing.
I feel like then it's got to be comedy, man. Like if I have just an acoustic guitar and my voice, one thing, then it has my content would be like a hole in my bucket, Dear Eliza kind of song. Ed Sheeran, for example. Again, he's very limited to love songs, romance, and like it's overdone. I'm not that. I can't always write love songs. And the thing is, I don't have a very artistic way of writing all the time. Like not all my lyrics are artistic. Okay, like I usually have very literal lyrics. And that's not how it got to be.
See, your lyrics are altogether a different chapter. The way you played with lyrics.
No, you're talking about that one song. Now, what me and Vidyut do with Harmony and that other nation song that I've written, the songs I write for this content it's humor, it's funny stuff. That's got to be the way it is. But I'm saying even otherwise, when I'm writing about, I have a song called She, which is about rape. I've written it from 3 points of view. There's the rapist perspective, the victim's perspective, and a narrative perspective. So the lyrics are from 3 points of view. I've written songs for women. I've written songs for people. I mean, for like very preachy songs about how God is a myth, and like everything's about. So like those kinds of things, but they're very literal. And because I don't know why, I feel like I'm so this thing. And a friend of mine brought it up recently. He was like, music is not about that. It's not. If you're having a conversation with someone, if you're having a debate with someone, yeah, you can be literal. You can't write your artistic lyrics like that. So, I'm trying to say that there's no God, for example. In a song, you can't be like, oh, there's no God. You have to write it in a slightly way, so that people who believe the same thing that you believe will interpret it that way. People who may believe something else might have their own ways of interpreting it. But if I go and say there's no God, that's the one way to interpret it. And so my lyrics are usually like that. So I need to change that a little bit. But
No. I suggest as an audience who has listened a lot. I listened to a lot of your stuff a year ago. In between, I would show people your National song. And recently, I again heard a lot to get into that vibe of talking to you. Okay, what you have been about. But like as an audience perspective, no praising. I like the way you write. Even all the songs that you did as it from Arjun and the Teenage Men that you released with the Kappa TV. I liked all the vibe. Like some of the rhythms are so catchy. Sometimes the way you sang, I don't know, but it connected a bit more. Like sometimes you'll take that long stretch of a note that held me. Sometimes the fast lyrics held me. So from that perspective, the difference you add to each song, there was something different. There was something civil and there was something different in each song. So it made me look for, okay, what is different now? What is different now? Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. And I was able to find it. Look, not like just abstract into it, but also something fresh and something unique about it. So please,
thanks, man.
Don't change it from an audience perspective.
No, like for me, music is about melody, harmony, and rhythm. I mean, these three things have to be there for me. I always write two guitar parts. Like ever since I got into like the Megadeth kind of vibe, I love harmonies. I love harmonizing guitar parts, whether it's rhythm guitars or it's leads. It's really nice when you have harmonizing chords playing over each other. Again, I'm not a very theoretical person, so I can't tell you whether it's a fifth or a third naturally. I mean, I might have to calculate it, but I really like harmonies, and fifths and thirds are the most natural ones. I like playing around with harmonies. I like counter melodies rather than just playing a harmony of it, playing a counter melody where the notes harmonize because of the way that I learned from Pain of Salvation, Simon and Garfunkel. They do that a lot, So these things I really like doing. So my music will still, I love the fact that my music has melody and rhythm because that's something I will never change. But I feel like my lyrics could be, at least the artistic songs, could be a little more open to interpretation, But if it's just me and an acoustic guitar, I would have to, my strength is not writing very arbitrary. Like, for example, Eddie Vedder can do something magical. Kurt Cobain can do something magical with that guitar and his voice. I can't do that. My content has to be funny. It has to be clever, like in the Nation song, where it's like there's a style of poetry where you do this, where the first word leads in, or like that Hole in the Bucket Eliza song, which is brilliant. It's such a brilliant song. It's a simple thought. There's a hole in my bucket. I can't fetch water. She's telling him techniques to fix that damn bucket, and he's like, okay, how? Which all goes back to this big circle to, okay, finally at the end he needs that bucket to fix it. So it goes back to, it's amazing. I like doing these kind of things. And if you concentrate on, that's why I feel simple melodies, which have, like in the Nation song, there's nothing fancy going on the guitar. My vocals are also not, it's not something that I would sing in an ATM song, because, that's not showing off my vocal abilities in any way. It's a very simple, what the focus in that song is the lyrics. So those kind of things I like doing with an acoustic guitar and my voice, just my voice. I have a scary song.
If I give you like a jazz sequence, like all the minor 7s and 13s, would you like to experiment with a bit? For example, okay, something like this. Let me know if you're able to hear this. Able to hear? Okay, ooh. So
yeah.
So something like this. Whatever.
This is also really cool because this is still simple. What you're playing is very, very, there's not too much happening in that. If I'm singing over this, if I'm singing over that, you can still pay attention to the lyrics. But what you played right now is great. It's actually very, it sets a vibe, but it's still for you to focus on what's happening
Because
vocally.
in jazz also, people, the audience mostly listen to the singer, what he's singing about. The musicians listen to all the other chords and where he took that sound from where he took that sound. A lot of impression happening. But if I'm not a jazz musician, I'll listen to the singer. So it has that, okay, what is he singing about? There is that abstractness also. And adding to that, if a musician listens, he'll listen to the entire band. So would you like to experiment something like that?
That yeah, it's funny you say that, but it does kind of vary because a lot of people, before music became such a big part of my life, I rarely focused on the lyrics. I mean, the only times I listen to the lyrics is when I have to sing the song. But excuse me, I barely focused on the lyrics. For me, the songs that I liked were songs that had melody, had rhythm. Something about it was the melody or the rhythm or the way somebody uses their voice. Like I heard Wannabe Starting Something. One of the first songs I really liked was Wannabe Starting Something. And the way he goes saying, you just want to be starting. That falsetto, that part just, I had to keep rewinding the song just for that part. And that was brilliant. You know, I have these certain hooks which I really liked, which used to, I didn't know what he was saying. I had no idea that he was saying you just want to be starting something. That's what he's saying. I was just like, whatever it sounded like is what I used to say. Even to me, there was one part where I used to sing George of the Jungle. I used to think he's singing George of the Jungle, you know, like he says, love is a feeling, give it when I want it. Because I'm on fire. There's no George of the Jungle, but in some part, I just thought he was singing George of the Jungle, and you know, as a kid, so I didn't care about lyrics. I was mostly into the. But yeah, it's funny that you say that because non-musician people always do. They kind of tend to. A lot of people have not liked certain songs of mine because of that. You know, like I'll send it to them, and I know I have some people that I send music to before it's released, before I've even while I'm working on it. You know. So I value their feedback. So some of them, they listen to it and they'll be like, so I'll be like, so what do you think of this song? And it will be a point where I'm still working on the lyrics. So I'm actually looking at it from a musical point of view. I want your feedback as in what do you think of my piece? Do you like the melody? Do you like the vocals? Do you like blah, blah? So she replies saying, no, it's terrible. You can do better. And I was like, whoa, why? What do you mean? She's like, I don't like the lyrics. I'm like, no, fuck the lyrics. I'm still working on the lyrics. What do you think of the song? She's like, no, you work on the lyrics and send it to me. And I was like, oh, shit. So then the melody is nice, it's okay, but you have to work on the lyrics and then I can give you better feedback. So then I finish the lyrics, then send it back, and then they'd be like, oh, this is actually nice. So for them, when they're listening to it, they're judging the song based on the lyrics, and it's not so much about the melody. For me, it's more about the melody at that time because I'm not just with lyrics. And I come from a background like that. Like I've always listened to music as music rather than as poetry. And I'm learning these things. And because I'm a singer-songwriter who's self-taught, a lot of my knowledge is based on stuff that I've learned from other people, not stuff that I've learned in a classroom. So I fortunately learned from people like Kurt Cobain, Axl Rose, Daniel Gillenlow. When it comes to lyrics and stuff, I've learned from these kind of people. So I did try to imitate that and kind of came up with my own style of writing, but I'm still exploring. Like, I mean, I don't have a fixed writing style.
Okay, here's like a proper Coffee with Karan question. If of all the songs that you have you have influences on, I have a song.
Nice. Okay.
Of all the songs that you have been influenced on, if I have to ask you, give me top 3, which impresses you in terms of lyrics, in terms of melody, in terms of the whole song. Give me top 3.
Wow, that's a very difficult question, man. I
know.
I wouldn't answer this. There are way too many, and I'm saying like, okay, I can. At the top of my head, Estranged is a great song. Not my favorite Guns N' Roses song, but it's a great song. November Rain, again. I'm saying like when it comes to things, amazing. But I don't know, dude. I really don't. See, that's what I'm saying. Like stuff like Bruno Mars, for example. I'm not a big fan of his lyrics, but dude, he is magical. I feel like there is no one who can do Michael Jackson other than Michael Jackson and maybe Bruno Mars.
Okay, then here's a tough question. Another question on that one. Have you heard an instrumental where there is no lyrics in scope? Like someone like a Joe Satriani or for that matter, like
even forget that. Yeah, I mean they have a lot of stuff.
Any instrumental which blew your mind just by the melody.
Like So I like of the solo guitar players, Kiko Loriro is one of my favorites.
Oh,
because
he's
I really
good.
like his vibe. Again, melodic stuff, dude, amazing. Slash is brilliant. Slash is brilliant because I love his melodic sense, dude. It's like you can be as fast as the Slayer guitar players, but I mean, what's his name, Kerry King?
Kerry King.
Yeah, I've never been a fan. I've never been a Slayer fan. Even in my metal days, I like bands like Megadeth. I like bands like Dream Theater. I like bands like Pain of Salvation. I like melodic metal. I don't like Slayer.
What do
I
you think
don't like.
about Yngwie Malmsteen?
He's good, but again, I feel like he's not my favorite. He's great. He's very good. He's again flashy more than melodic. Like I feel
But
like
he has that depth to it. His
Yeah,
sound
I mean,
has a different.
I'm only talking about a taste thing. Like his melodic sense. Yngwie is a very melodic guitar player, but his melodic sense doesn't appeal to me as much as say a Kiko Loriro or an Eric Johnson. Eric Johnson's great.
Oh.
Eric Johnson also has really good melodic. Those kind of melody.
Oh, what about that guy? Guthrie Govan.
Guthrie Govan's great. John Petrucci is fucking amazing. John Petrucci is
he's alien. Let me be clear. That guy is the alien.
If you haven't heard Pain of Salvation, listen to Daniel. Daniel Gildenlow is the man behind Pain of Salvation. He's a genius. I mean, again, I think his favorite band is Simon and Garfunkel, but you won't be able to tell that when you listen to his kind of music. Very heavy, plus melodic. So, if you listen to Pain of Salvation, each album of theirs is very different from the other. Like you can't expect something, okay? Like when you say Megadeth is releasing their new album, you know what to expect. You know what's coming out, and if that doesn't come out, you'll be very disappointed. You know what I'm saying? But with the Pain of Salvation, it's very different. Like I have been expecting a certain album, and they released this album called Road Salt, which was one of the first new sound albums that I had heard of Pain of, because I had heard their other stuff. I had heard Entropia, I had heard Remedy Lane, I had heard B, and 1 Hour by the Concrete Lake, which all have this. It's very different from each other, but they still have this very heavy vibe going on. And then Road Salt comes, which is it starts with this very bluesy song, and the tones are very old school tube amp blues, and like it's not distortion anymore. And I was like, whoa, I'm not gonna like this album. And I heard the album; it became my favorite album of theirs up to then. And I was like, whoa. And then the next one. So every album you listen to, even if you're expecting something else, his songwriting is so intense. The way he matches the lyrics to go with the melodies, to go with everything. That's an experience. Like Daniel Gildenlow's songs are experiences. Like if you listen to his music, it's an experience, man. He can take you on a journey with the words he uses, and his vocals are like he can go as low as like baritone low to freaking higher than Michael Jackson highs. Okay, in his
higher than Michael Jackson highs.
In his Michael Jackson is not much of a falsetto range. Like he's got a high range, but like Axl Rose goes higher than Michael Jackson. I mean, Michael Jackson doesn't go into that frequency, is what I'm saying. Daniel can go into that. Michael Jackson doesn't go to that octave. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't do that throat screaming as much as say an Axl Rose or a Daniel Gildenlow or whatever. I'm saying Daniel can go from like whoa low to fucking high. You'd be like, well, how is the same guy singing these two songs? It's not possible. But yeah, I've met him personally, had the experience of sharing the stage with him, cried with him, and
you met him?
Yeah, he's on. We're Facebook friends. In fact, I put up a picture on Facebook recently saying, "Oh man," because I kind of put a goatee. So this haircut happened first, and then this goatee was new. So I was like, "Oh, my new look or whatever." And I put up a picture, and Daniel Gildenlow liked it, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, dude!" Okay, so.
Now I don't care who tells me don't cut my hair or change my look. He's loved it. Fair enough.
I don't give up. Daniel Gildenlow. I don't care.
Okay, but coming back to the most important question, I didn't check when did you have this hair look. When did you have your hair cut? Why did you cut your hair? People were loving it.
Wow. I don't know. So I've always liked long hair ever since I can remember. And I think after my 11th onwards, I have never had short hair. I've never gone this short since then. Like it's been more than 21 years since I've gone this short. So I have a really good stylist, Zahabia Leswara. She's fabulous. Okay, she's the only one I will trust with this. Like I would never trust anybody else to do this with my hair. But so she I'd gone to her once and we'd come up with this undercut that she'd given me, where like this entire portion was like I think 0 on the.
You posted that also, saying I had a haircut just showing this much. I remember that.
So yeah, that was so that undercut phase. I really liked. But the thing is, every time I cut my hair after that, like for a day, I can tell the difference because she'll style my hair really well and whatever, so it looks different. But I think it was the styling that made it look different. But because the next morning when I wake up and I go back to my business, it looks pretty much the same as it was because it's long, it's whatever. Then lockdown happens and my hair grew really long and my undercut grew out. Okay, literally. So I tied my hair, I'd have this back that comes out like this, and I was like, hey, this is what I'd look like with short hair, and I kind of like the look. So I was like, it's been a while, let me see what happens. And I was very nervous, but then I trust Zahabia, so I sent her some references, and then we were very excited about what's gonna happen. Then I went there and she did it, and I was like, fuck yeah, dude, I'm gonna keep this for a while. I'm actually enjoying it, I think. But the thing is, I need product, okay? Like when my hair is not built to be short, it's built for length. Because when it's short, it stands up where I part it. Like not this is still long, but I'm saying like if it's short, like crew cut short, it's standing up where the parting is. And then if I leave my hair without product right now, it just becomes bushy. It falls like this, and it's just very, So it looks really weird when it's short. When it's long, I don't do shit to my hair. Like I don't do anything. I wash it and condition it like regularly, but that's about it. I don't put product. And a lot of people ask me, what the hell do you do to your hair and all. Now I can actually have conversations with them and they say, oh, what do you do to your hair? Yeah, I use this product, and I can actually talk about it.
I'm just thinking how this podcast has gone. We started from music to schools to English teachers to now we ended up on haircut.
Yeah, I'm extraordinaire, so
No, but that's the fun. Like this is what I wanted to have anyway, because the idea was like a lot of time now I listen to a certain band, I listen to a certain song, and the song is about something, but I'm more interested on okay, what made them write this song, what was the thought behind composition, choosing this sequence of chords, why these set of lines, what is your thought process behind this when you write?
Usually it's more often than not, it's a pattern that comes. It's like a hook that I'm playing, which I really like, and I build on that. But the thought process, it varies.
Let me
it's
give
just
you.
about
Let me just narrow it down. What do you think about when you wrote "Open My Mind"?
Open My Mind was actually a song that Chinu, Ignition, when we were at Ignition, it's Chinu's song. I co-wrote it with him. We'd shared verses. We'd come up with ideas together. That's his song. So it's something that we at that time we were on a very weird, like completely different zone. We were talking about all kinds of things, and there was no taboo subject and everything. We just like everything was. So that song, when if thinking about how we were when we were playing that song, when we every time we performed that song, every time we like, even I'm not even talking about shows, like we would sit on the terrace and we'd change parts, we'd come up with different, like a separate verse or something, and then we'd be like, hey, what do you think of this? The journey was so exciting, it just felt natural. I had very little to do with the lyrical aspect of that song, but I felt every moment of it. I'm saying the version that I did with ATM, I think one of those verses was mine, but I'm not sure. I don't remember. That song has changed a lot since we played, but I don't remember what if we ever had a fixed, like the song itself didn't have a thing. Like right now, if you see version of that song, it won't sound the same at all. This is very similar to the version we had based it on. I mean the Ignition version of it, but it's gone. Like that song has evolved more than anything else. Okay.
What about All in Your Head?
Say, She is an anti-rape song, and that's one song which I wrote lyrically first. I mean, as in like I had the concept before I had anything else.
I haven't heard She. Is this released anywhere?
It's released. She is there on Kappa as well as it's on iTunes and we have an album called.
I'll check this one out. She.
I forgot the first chord. I can't believe it. It's been a while. So it's a. Can you hear?
Very low. I'm trying to concentrate a lot.
Okay, so it's this ninth pattern that I had, which I liked, and it had a very, because it's a ninth chord. It has a very sad feel to it, and whatever, it was going into this really weird zone, and I just felt like it. I felt heavy. I felt like the song it should be about something heavy, and at that time there was this whole Nirbhaya scene that was going on. Was that the Delhi one, right?
Delhi.
So there was a lot of that energy going on, and dude, honestly, I'm a strong believer of, like, I don't believe in God, but I really believe that the energy you're around creates your reality. Okay, you create your reality based on the energy you're around and whatever's going on around you. And uh, because of what was going on at that time is probably why I decided to write about this, and it just flew. It fit in place. I didn't have to think much. I rarely think. And when you said why do I use chord patterns, I don't do it that way. I only play by ear, so I very rarely know the chords I'm playing until I've come up with the song, and then I'm like, oh, I need to figure out what this chord is, and then, oh, it's a so and so chord. But so depending on where the melody takes me and what happens with it, it kind of comes naturally. Then there are certain artistic things that I take certain artistic liberties in terms of what kind of an accent I want, because when I'm writing my lyrics, sometimes I feel like the rhyme style works. A lot of times it doesn't. I don't feel like every song has to rhyme, but there are some phrases when you sing it that way, the rhymes work. And again, it doesn't. Where the rhymes come, if you see in my songs, it won't always be the last word. It depends on how I'm phrasing it vocally, you know. So I might say, you can be want to see, take me, like that one word can have rhyme words together versus whatever. So it depends on the phrase, right? So at times like that, when I was writing this song, I just felt like I didn't want it to be a preachy song. I didn't want to say don't rape, because if you are a person who needs to be taught that rape is not a good thing, I'm not singing to you. There's no reason for you to listen to my song. I don't connect with that that kind of a vibe, right? So nor do we need what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, where we don't need to know about it. What is that word? There's a word. We don't need awareness. Sorry, yeah. Nor do we need awareness about the fact that rape is happening. What I was trying to achieve out of that song was that it's something that could happen. Like, most of us feel that it's happening. It's not going to happen to me. I don't do these things. I don't wear clothes like that. But I'm saying it's not about that. It's not about the clothes you wear. It's not about who you are. It's not about who you hang out with. It could happen to anybody. It could happen to the most decent family person. It could happen to the most pessimistic person, most optimistic. It doesn't matter. It's a situational thing, right? My point is, I don't believe anybody's been born a rapist either. I feel like it's situations that lead somebody to go. My point is, if you're walking on a street and you're scared that when you see a gang rape happening or something like that, or some eve teasing happening, you're scared that if you go and do this, you'll get beaten up or you might be killed or something like that. That should change, because I don't think that that's how it is. I feel like there's a crowd watching. Nobody has the balls to do it. One person does. It could be the smallest person goes and makes something. That whole crowd will then react. And that was the message I was trying to convey. Don't take videos and put social media, because this girl getting raped today, tomorrow the world having to know about it is not, we don't need that. We don't need awareness. I don't need to see a Facebook post of a girl getting raped for me to know that, oh, really? It's happening? Shit. I thought it was a myth. No. So don't take videos while it's happening and then post it on social media. No, go fucking stop. Try that once. You might get hit once or twice, but there will be people. People will come. When one person makes it, people will come. So that message I wanted to get across with this song. And I kind of decided to do it with 3 perspectives, and the lyrics just fit. I usually write my melodies before the lyrics, more often than not. Very few songs have the lyrics come first. Too Young to Die was a song I wrote with Kappa TV. That was one of the very first songs I wrote, and that was a song I was test driving my friend Suzuki Fiero or something like that, and went really fast, near death accident almost. Like, if it was an accident, I would have died. But like, there was a bus I was trying to overtake, no divider, and it was that Anna flyover, if you know Chennai.
It's a deadly.
So I'm going really, yeah, and I can feel my face like pull. So I'm going really fast, okay? And I'm trying to go overtake this bus. So the bus that's in front of me, I'm trying to overtake. And then I see another bus coming from the other side. and I couldn't brake because I would have skidded. So I had to like, I went a gear down and I went faster, and both those buses just zipped past me like that. And I was like, ooh, when I had to have a cigarette, I lit a cigarette, my hands were shaking. So I wrote that song that evening. I'd just written it as a piece. I didn't have
Wow. That was,
I just wrote.
it all just played in front of me. Two buses coming in the gap you passed.
They were scary, dude. Really, really scary. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. Like, just so close, dude. One mistake, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Okay, so yeah, it was damn scary. That song, I had to let it out, so I kind of wrote, and it also finished really fast. The next day, I had the song. Like, I woke up the next morning and I played around my guitar, and it just fit. So that song, I wrote the lyrics first, but I usually write my melodies and my vocal phrasings and stuff before I write my lyrics, and then depending on what mood I'm in, I write based on that.
Nice. So just to, like, for the listeners, if they want to listen to your content, now I know you have multiple channels, but like if they want to know, okay, something new has come up, where do they look out for?
So please follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Then you will be up to date with whatever content, wherever, whichever channel. But specific stuff, I have their own channel. Like ATM has its own channel, Novrek has its own. And depending on the frequency of work that we're doing, our channel is active or not active, which is something.
But like this Plug Point, when can we expect like a track?
I think by November we should have our first video out, because right now it's being mixed and the video is being edited. I should have my first draft sometime this week. But my sound engineer is based in Florida. He's based in Los Angeles, but he's living in Florida now. So we're just trying. So we're in the final stages of the mix and the edit for our first video. So that should be out soon. But once that happens, then I don't want to waste time. So we're trying to build our content before we post this, so that I can keep posting as it comes. I mean, I don't want to have 6 months before we go into something else, especially something like this, because I want to make use of I want to use this year. I don't see live gigs happening for us anytime this year. So I want to, even if it starts, I don't want to, we are, because of this style that we have, glitch rock and all, we need to produce a lot of stuff before we can perform it live. So there's a lot of back-end stuff that needs to happen. So I thought, since we're doing that anyway, we might as well record every song that we're going to do, whether it's a cover or an original. Might as well record every song before we perform it live.
What about like something what Dave Chappelle did? Like he had a gap of 2 feet between chairs or set of chairs. Like maybe you will have only 50 people in the audience. No,
that's not why I'm saying. I can perform. If live gigs start, I'd love to perform. This is the longest time I've never been on stage before, man, and it's really, really frustrating. In fact, it's more frustrating than the sex part of it. That at least there's other happy, but I can't just play and do a live gig like this and say, oh, I feel, no, man, it's a different vibe. Like I really, really, this is something I can't wait to get out of. I meant for Plug Point, because I can do acoustic gigs, I can do ATM gigs, whatever. But Plug Point, I can do 2 songs now, because we've done the production 2 songs. We did Ye Hasi Wadiyan and we did Tum Hi Ho. I don't know why we did Tum Hi Ho, but it has a really nice guitar solo at the end. So Pallav has a bunch of stuff that he's done. But that's what I said. So we're working on that right now. We haven't finished either of the 2 originals yet. There are 2, because we've done 2 covers. We finished Tum Hi Ho and we finished Ye Hasi Wadiyan. They're being mixed right now. But because of that, I didn't want to just do covers. I thought, since we're doing this by ourselves, we'll do 4 songs. We'll do 2 originals, 2 covers by ourselves, self-produced, self-financed, whatever, shoot videos. Then put it out and then see what we can do. Try and pitch to One Digital or QK or whatever. I had a really good friend in QK, but he passed, unfortunately. So, that's just the idea. But the lyrics, I won't have anything to do with it. This will all be Pallav's stuff. I'm composing.
Change with Bollywood and covers, because like you said,
my brother are aware of this. My brother Keshav, he plays with Sanam. Have you heard of Sanam, the band?
I heard of Keshav also.
So he plays with Sanam. So so I've seen how how impactful it can be, and the thing is, I like their stuff. Like when they record their music, I've rarely been like, what is that song? But when I hear the most of the songs that they've done, I mean, of course, Lag Ja Gale and all, some of these really popular ones was a different story. But a lot of the songs that they've done, I didn't know that they existed. I was like, hey, so is this an original? And you'd be like, no, this is so and so's. And then when I hear the originals, I'm like, yuck, why? Okay, so I was like, wow. So I mean, it's not bad actually. Like when you hear the Sanam version of it,
They're good.
it's
They're good.
nice. Oh, this is actually pretty cool. So I was like, okay, I decided that their manager at the time, Ben, who he's fired now, but that time Ben was their manager, and we were talking about trying to do this together. He came for one of my gigs. This was a Cover That gig. We have a cover band with Siddharth Kadadi and all called Cover That. So we had done a covers gig, Guns N' Roses and all that. So Ben had come for that show. He called me to his office, and he used to manage Sonu Nigam and Vishal Shekhar and all these guys before he took on Sanam. So he called me to his office, and he was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Like, we'll, this thing about playing on stage, and we need to bring this performance element to the industry, blah, blah, blah. Had a nice discussion before he's like, so you can sing in Hindi, right? And I'm like, what? No. Next time, start with that. So since then, though, I've been thinking of this idea, and we've been trying to do it. And so, but it didn't work. I tried to sing, it didn't work out. It was a flop. Everybody I played, like the nicest friends I have, I played the track to, they were all like, music is superb, bro. I'm like, but what about the vocals? Nahin, tu Angrezi mein ga, please. Okay. So that was the feedback. Hopefully when Plug Point comes out, I want to show the world that, listen, music doesn't have a language, dude. Like Rock On doesn't have to be, you can have Bollywood rock songs. It's amazing. It's just that people have this whole, like, that's why I hate saying Nervewreck is a metal band. Because when you say metal, people imagine Slayer. And Nervewreck has nothing to do with Slayer. The songwriter of Nervewreck hates Slayer. Ask me, I hate Slayer. I can't stand that band. So I will never write songs like that. But we are a metal band. But so again, rock doesn't honestly have to go into I hope let's just see, like when Plug Point comes out, I really hope
I'm very interested
define
how this
because I'm bringing back that whole, and I'm keeping the Iron Maiden vibe in this band, dude. Like there's going to be harmony guitar solos all over the place, and it's something that I like. It's something that I think the world will enjoy if you just come out of that slightly narrow shell की distortion क्या होता है, उसमें अच्छा भी हो सकता है, बुरा भी हो सकता है, चूतिए. Okay, so yeah, that's it's just like I want to just share this with the world. So let's see. Hopefully, I'm dreaming big with it, but only time will tell. So
when you release Plug Point songs, I'd like to invite you and Pallav both. Let's talk about the songs once they're released. After that, we'll talk about original signing. How did you write the song that way? I didn't think I would be excited about a Bollywood band, but Hindi band, let's say. But after seeing what Sanam killed it. They've just they're not sellouts because they love what they're doing. Like it's not something that they all like different styles of music and they're just doing this for the money. No, you can tell they're not doing this for just the money because there's heart and soul in every song that they release. My brother plays in Sanam, so I've practically heard all their songs when they're recording it, right? So I've heard the process that goes in, and a lot of their songs, it may not be my favorite style of music, but it's stuff that I would never change the channel if I hear something like this coming. But any of those songs that the original versions, I can't listen to more than 2 minutes of it. I cannot. And because now I have to cover some of them, I will listen to it, but I can't. And I don't want to listen to the already good versions of some of the songs that I might want to cover because I don't want to get influenced by the cover versions of these songs. You know what I mean? Okay, considering for Plug Point, you might have listened to some of the Bollywood numbers, I'm assuming. I have. What is your favorite Bollywood number till now? That you can listen to the entirety without any, it's a good song. I like Ae Dil Hai Mushkil, the original title track. Ae Dil Hai Mushkil. Not the old one, the new, the Ranbir Singh, Ranbir Kapoor, Ae Dil Hai Mushkil. I like that track. I think it's a very, very nice, beautiful song. Ye Hasi Wadiyan, man. That's, Roja songs are legendary. Ye Hasi Wadiyan is a song that I've loved
all my life, and it's like I saw the Tamil version of the movie. For me, that's the original. Okay, it's not Ye Hasi Wadiya, it's
Okay,
Pudu Velli.
Rahman is not supposed to be heard in Hindi. It's supposed to
Yeah,
be heard in Tamil. He
absolutely,
is
absolutely. That entire album, I can listen to that album anytime, anywhere, and I will not get bored. That
okay.
entire album, even that melody in one of their songs where it goes ta 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 na na na
Ah,
na na. Like where, dude? Where did that come from? I don't know what he was doing when he came up with that. Brilliant, like amazing. He's a genius, man. He's amazing.
I don't know
I
about this, how what the credibility of this story, but apparently I heard it somewhere that when he came to the scene, all the composers, of course, they compose and mix and master it with proper studio monitors. But when Rahman started, he also mastered based on a TV speaker.
wow.
So to make sure that it's sounding, because the listener won't listen from a high quality speaker, he's listening from a TV. So he makes sure that it sounds good from there as well. So that's why his songs was that good, apparently. That became that big.
I haven't heard the story, but I wouldn't dispute it because he knows what to look for. He knows where to use compression, why to use compression, what kind of compression. I'm like, oh, compression, vocals, great. Okay.
How much compression is also there?
How much compression? What is attack? What is release? All these things. I mean, I am doing a little bit of YouTube studies before I tamper with these things, and I've learned a little bit on the go. But yeah, I wouldn't release any of my mixes as a, like if it's an EP or a blah blah. Like with ATM we're gonna do a live song. I think Lose the Noose we're doing, where we've all recorded it in our own setups, and we're gonna just shoot a video of us performing it at our own homes, and Aritra's gonna edit it and release it. So that, yeah, I mean, for that mix I can mix that down, just a basic, because I want that to be it's a live thing. It's just going to be how we sound live, right?
With your band Nerve-Wreck with your band Nerve-Wreck and Arjun that you mentioned, is it you who give the direction, okay, this is what the song is about, or how much input just from the band comes in?
Both these bands have been pretty much me so far, but to be honest, Ignition was my first band, and I really enjoyed Chino and me writing together. That process that we had, we were inseparable, man. We'd be with our guitars all the time. Parties, somebody's party, we'd take our guitars and we'll go, and invariably everybody will be drunk and passed out. We'll be sitting on the terrace coming up with ideas and writings. That experience was something else. Like, I really liked sharing that experience, which I feel happened with me and Ritesh, my drummer from Nerve-Wreck. When we were there, like, we were living in the same house practically. He'd be in my house, I'd be in his house, and whatever. We'd always share ideas and whatever. So I like doing that. But then eventually, like, when we grew old, and then we had to like worry about money and stuff like that, and you have to make money and survive. So now I can't expect unless I'm paying my band members, I can't expect any of them to be fully committed to this band unless I can take care of them, right? So if I say I need you to commit to ATM, then yeah, I need to pay your bills and whatever with ATM. But we can't do that. So everybody has their own scene going on these days. So because I have the direction and whatever, I've taken it, and we can always do that. Like, I can write a bass part and send it to you, and you can record it. I can write it on my guitar and send it to you, and you can record it. And I want you to put your element into it though, because you're my bassist. Because with ATM it's Roop. With Nerve-Wreck we had Kita, who was and Ishan eventually when I moved to Bombay. But they all have their own ways of playing, their own vibes. And in fact, right now when I'm writing for Nerve-Wreck, I kind of think differently when it comes to bass because of the way Roop plays and stuff like that. I think differently with my bass ideas. I think differently with ideas depending on who the drummers are and whatever. Ritesh but when I'm saying, like, when I have musicians that I can trust to do their own thing, that's a different vibe. I love that. I love the fact that I can, and with Plug Point, I feel like even though I'm the one giving it direction, because I think every band needs that one leader to have a vision for where it's going. But as a leader, I know how much I can trust my musicians to do, and I know for a fact that I have a knack of writing music where I can get any style of music I want to compose. I can get any musician who's good enough in their instrument to come and play for me, because I'm composing everything. I have that, but I still prefer being in a situation where my drummer can come up with his drum ideas because of the way he thinks, and my bassist can come up with bass ideas because of the way he thinks, rather than me coming up with the entire idea. I can come up with the arrangement, the structure, the whatever, but now when I know that I can send it to you and say, hey, bass parts need to be done, and you will send it back to me with something magical. That I really, really look forward to. And I think that can happen with Plug Point. Right now, I feel like it's still Emmanuel, our producer. And I have done pretty much most of for both these songs that we've recorded. Emmanuel and I have done everything. Pallav's done his vocals, but Emmanuel did some of the production stuff. I've programmed the drums. The drums, Ritesh and I sat and video called, and because I love Ritesh's ideas. I cannot think like him. His groove sense is something else. And even if he's not going to be playing it and I'm going to be programming it, I want him to I want to discuss the ideas with him. And we have a really, really good rapport when it comes to writing music together. We don't say, okay, I think we should have a 6/8 here for the first 5 bars, then switch to a 7/8. None of that. Dude, start with okay, like, ooh, sweet, okay. Like, should I go no, actually, yeah, that sounds better. So, like, that's how we compose. Even
nice.
That's how we compose. And like, he'd play something, I'd play something, I'm like, hey, dude, try it. And he'd be like, oh, okay, yeah. And then we'll do, that's literally our connection. And we just magically came up with this brilliant vibe. So I feel like once things start happening, when the lockdown opens up, when COVID is done and we forget about this shit, and we start playing together, when we have that first jam session together as a band, I feel like this Plug Point can be that band where I do the arrangement or whatever, and I can then send it to everybody saying, hey man, because the musicians have that capability, and every single member in this band is, in this lineup, I feel every single member in this band is irreplaceable, and that's a good feeling. Like, I really like that. Now I know that I can take this somewhere. Like, I've tried, I told you that Hindi band idea came really long back. But I've never had the excitement to do it. I'm like, yeah, and if I'm doing it, I'm doing it for the money. There was nothing else. There was no motivation for me to do it. Emmanuel's production helped a lot. I was like, fuck, this is what I want. I didn't know that was called glitch, okay? I was just like the other guys. We had tried another lineup earlier, and I told our producer, the guy who was supposed to be the producer, I'm like, so I want to have any kind of vibe, even if it's electronic, even if it has that vibe and all, don't worry. He took the electronic idea and he made it like a disco number, which wasn't what I was talking about. So it was difficult for me to communicate because of my lack of knowledge of what it's called in terms of genres and stuff. But Emmanuel's style was just there, and I was like, fuck, this is what I want. And then he's like, yeah, oh, you like glitch? I'm like, oh, it's called glitch, is it? Okay, cool. Thanks for okay. So there's a lot of, his melodic sense I really like. So Emmanuel and I have done pretty much everything for these 2 songs that we composed. Like, I played the bass tracks, I composed, I played the guitar tracks, I programmed the drums, and I literally played the bass tracks with the Venky's bass. But when we do eventually get there, I know for a fact that even the bass ideas, Ritesh and I kind of sat and we made together. But that's what I like about it. I like this togetherness rather than one person. Like, I can do that, but with Nerve-Wreck, I've done that. And I've done that with ATM also for the longest time. But now ATM, my guitarist, the second guitarist, Vignesh, he and I sit together and we really, really. So with Plug Point also, we're 5 members, but I need 2 guitarists. So Vignesh is going to be my sessions guitar player for Plug Point for sure. He's also very busy these days. So I don't want a full-time, as 6 members is complicated anyway. And I don't want a full-time member unless he's going to be a contributing member to the compositions. So right now I'm doing the guitar aspects, but I'm writing both. I'm writing both parts because I know that I need the second guitar player. And Vignesh has been really good. So Vignesh and I saw him first. Have you heard of Orion?
Yeah, of course.
Band?
Yeah, come on.
Orion, I think Orion was the first time I saw them play. This friend of mine, Amog, when I moved to Bombay, he was kind of showing me around and tried to help me. He introduced me to Hamza for Nerve-Wreck. He's like, he'd be a great drummer. But Hamza is a fabulous drummer, dude. Everybody talks about he's genius. But for Nerve-Wreck, I can't do without Ritesh. Ritesh is my drummer, dude.
These drummers are so, like, I don't know whether these drummers, they know themselves or not, but Hamza, Viru, Mayank, in indie scene, they are god level. All the drummers that I've met, oh damn, have you heard Mayank play in that Signema number? I am like, whoa, like these drummers. Like I remember one of my friends when my band was active, we were performing in Washi, and this guy came with me just after our performance, and we were talking about. Then he actually came not because I am his friend and my band is performing. He came to him that Virendra Kath has come, and he's looking into the entire crowd. Where is Viru? Where is Viru? Where is Viru? And there was Viru sitting on a footpath having a cigarette. Like,
Yeah,
Viru,
dude.
Viru.
And Viru, again, like, if you ask the metal scene people, Viru is Viru because he's, metal drummer. He's not a metal drummer. He's a very versatile drummer. Viru is a very versatile drummer. Mayank is a very, very versatile drummer. And I'm saying, see, because of the fact that these guys like metal, they're very good at metal. But I know, like most metal drummers I know are very bad with timing. They have they're not great with their timing sense. I feel the more versatile musicians are the ones who have this grasp, because metal is all about speed, and the faster you play, the easier it gets after a point. Okay, because even when you're practicing guitar, drums, whatever, when you're playing at 60 and you're playing at the one note per note on 60, that's the hardest to do.
That is tough.
Like, that is the hardest to do. So I'm saying these guys have power, and that's why I'm saying, like, someone like a Hamza, he's got amazing musical ideas in terms of, because he likes Tool, the influences he has, very, very technical. But if you give him a simple riff, he's not going to think, oh fuck, how can I complicate it and make. He's going to play what goes well with that, right? And that's what I mean. So, like, if you give Hamza, the most technical drummer that people know, a simple beat, he doesn't have to complicate it. But if you give a Hamza fan or a Hamza student that, he's going to try to become a Hamza in like a complicated band for this simple song. And that ruins things for me. So that's why I feel like the most versatile musicians are the people that I get along with these days and I trust, because I can trust you to look at it as a different song. If it's Nerve-Wreck, you look at it as Nerve-Wreck. If it's ATM, you look at it as ATM. And I can have the same members in both bands when you're that. Like, Ritesh is one of those kinds. Like, he can be in any. You listen to RJD and you tell me if you can imagine that guy on the vocals and guitars is the drummer of Nerve-Wreck. You will be like, what? How? Okay, it's a very different vibe. His songwriting there is very different. What he thinks is very different. But I don't have to tell him what to do no matter what. Like, whatever the vibe is, he'll know what will work and he'll come up with it. And that's something I love working with people like that. That's why when I'm saying Chinu and I used to work like that. Like, initially we didn't have, it wasn't, Ignition was Chinu's band. I had auditioned for it. They were looking for a vocalist or a guitarist, I don't know what. But then when I auditioned, like, I kind of filled both shoes. So they were like, oh, great, come. So that's how it started. And Chinu and I used to share both vocals and guitars. We'd share vocals depending on what songs we were singing. And we were a 4-piece band. We loved performing. We loved playing. We loved writing music together. So it wasn't like, if it was my song, I came up with a riff, I'd again show it to Chinu and then we'd work on it together. If he came up with a riff, he'd work on it, we'd work on it together. And we used to really enjoy that process. Versus when I left Ignition, and then I actually got kicked out because of womanizing, which was bad for the band image at the time, apparently.
Oh.
We were kids.
Oh, you are the Dave Mustaine of Ignition.
No, man, not. Like, fuck, it was like crazy. But, so then when I formed Nerve-Wreck, it was a very different vibe. I didn't have musicians in the band who were professionals at what they were doing. My drummer was a Carnatic singer, and he had a drum kit, like a machine which we could program beats on. So that's how we met. But then eventually he sat and learned and taught himself to play the drums. And we had very simple beats. But I remember we went to Bangalore. First time we played Campus Rock Idol, we made it to the South Zone finals. He carried a double bass pedal to do just that with his double bass. He carried that pedal for that one roll, and that's a single bass roll. Technically, it's a slide. You go any drummer will play that single bass. He carried a double bass pedal to do but I love that dude. That first lineup, me, this guy called Wayne Moulton on bass, and Pradeep on the drums. We were a 3-piece metal band. Played Megadeth, played Pain of Salvation. No, Pain of Salvation came much later. Played Megadeth and stuff like that. But we killed it. I loved that lineup. In that we were so simple. We didn't have any musical knowledge and theory and background. We were just three kids having fucking fun. And because I have a musical background, I've been singing since I was 3 apparently. I knew when things weren't working out. Like if it was off, I'd be like, no, actually try this, try that. But we made it, and we won the first show we ever played. The first show we played was a competition, and we won that. And we were like, whoa, this is amazing. So we went on from there. Then eventually my brother came. He was on the drums. When the music got a little more technical, I started being influenced by Dream Theater and Pain of Salvation, and slowly the vibe changed. So from a three-piece thrash metal, we became a 5-piece progressive metal band over a matter of few years. But when I found Ritesh is when I found that Chinu vibe again. I'd never had that kind of a relationship with anybody else, which what Chinu and I had in terms of writing music together. Then I found Ritesh and we started doing that, and I was like, fuck, this is what I need. And I feel Plug Point eventually when we put out our content and things start happening for us, I feel like this is that kind of a band where every member is a specialist at their own instrument, not just in that they can play very well, they can come up with ideas for their own instruments really, really well. So I'm excited. I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Amazing. Okay, Arjun, thank you very much to be a part of this podcast. I'll definitely calling you twice more. One for Plug Point, and I'll let you know when RGD comes in. So once he said all those stuff, then I'll invite you from back to join the conversation, and I'll tell you what this guy has said. I want you to say that. Thanks, man.
Guys, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.
Thank you very much.